Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
Indeed it is. It's showtime. We're all set to go. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast, the daily edition. Welcome in as we record this. Considering the way things have happened so quickly of late, we have to actually label it and say, as we record this, it's Wednesday, February the 5th, just after 11 o'clock a.m. And by the time you listen to this, some things may have changed. So just a heads up. But it will be the commentary and the analysis of the situation we find ourselves in right now that you'll really want to hang around with. So welcome in. It is the daily episode of On the Ledge, and happy to welcome back Monique Smith from Global Public Affairs. John Wright is here, of course, our original veteran pollster. Amanda Galbraith, the partner at Oyster Group, and our friend from Daily Bread Food Bank, Neil Hetherington. And it's just good to have you all around the table as we go. And I think I know the politics of all of this, and I've sort of heard their perspectives on this. From your vantage point, Neil, you know, running the Daily Bread Food Bank, the bigger issues that you're dealing with, and we'll get into some of the conversations around poverty mitigation and so on. Just does this exhaust you, or do you look at this campaign as an opportunity?
Well, I think, you know, in the face of despair when it comes to more than 1 in 10 Torontonians now having to rely on the Daily Bread Food Bank, you've got to look at every election and every bit of chaos that's out there as opportunity to be able to say, here's what's going on, and here are some of the policy alternatives that are out there, and try your best to be able to weave them into the policy frameworks that each of the parties have.
And Amanda, that has been the challenge, right? I mean, considering we're not even talking about the bigger, broader issues that top the concerns of Ontarians, it's all Trump all the time. So, you know, if you were to give Neil any advice, how would you help him navigate and stick handle to make the best of this opportunity?
To cut through, I think, honestly, you know, ads are good. I think pushing the candidates and also local environments, right? You can always go to those town halls, those sorts of things. But I would say either you need to have a really big stunt that gets people's attention, or you need to have kind of a steady drip to kind of push through right now, because I'm telling my clients that it is a very tough media environment right now to cut into. I think we're even seeing that candidly with all of the leaders of the political parties, right? They're even having a lot of trouble getting attention paid to their announcements and events. And I don't think that is going to dissipate given the ferocity with which we're seeing in the US and the impacts it's having around the world.
Yeah, Monique, when we talk about, you know, your world of GR and government relations, most of the folks I talk to who live in that sector, similar to Amanda, saying, okay, we're just going to sit back and just let the sort of marbles roll out on the floor here to see exactly where everything plays before we take any definitive action on where we want to go. We want to see who's going to be in the chair. We want to see who the other players are around it. Do you find that that's sort of a sit and wait right now for you?
On the federal side, for sure. On the provincial side, I think, you know, we've got an opportunity right now to start to make a little bit more noise and talk about some issues that are really important to Ontarians with the reprieve from the tariffs that Trump has put in place. So 30 days is going to get us beyond this election, this useless election that we didn't need to have. And I think it's actually going to open up the kind of the platform to allow people to have a conversation about healthcare and education and the things that they're caring about. I'm up north, Dave, and I'm telling you, the newspapers up here are talking about the levels of people's food insecurity. We're talking about healthcare and the need for more doctors. They're talking about education and the state of our schools, and very much talking about housing and the failure of the Ford government to build anything. So, you know, I think that this is an opportunity right now. There's so much noise going on at the international level, at the national level, that I think, you know, this is a chance for people to talk about the issues that they care about.
Yeah, John, Amanda mentioned, you know, off the top, look at advertising, but even the way this is sort of rolled out so quickly in terms of an early call, we knew it was coming, but given the rules around third-party ads, even there, it would be a bit of a scramble to get effective ads into the market with any kind of effective impressions or being able to get anybody's attention.
Yeah, sure. Given everything that's even happened in the last news cycle in the United States, it kind of blots out everything in almost every country. We talked about this last week, where we said, if there was some kind of a deal, even short term on the tariffs, that there'd have to be a bit of a plan B, because the reality is that there can be some fatigue that happens out there. The polling numbers are still very, very favorable for the premier and the party. I mean, it's roughly 44% if you average them all out, to 26% for the Liberals, 21% for the NDP, and about 4% for the Green Party. So he still has a sizable lead at this point. The question now is whether or not the Conservatives themselves can break to a different tact, because there is this gap between when the tariff issue will come about. But it's got to be very, very tough for the opposition parties to cut through all the noise that's out there.
But the polls, as you will note, it are a lagging indicator, right, John, in terms of where we are. And so you have said on a number of occasions of late, let's see where we are, a week into this, 2 weeks into this. And now I realize we're a week and a day into it, but are you sensing any change, or is that shift away from the tariffs vis-a-vis not happening during the campaign period? It's going to happen after the election, if it happens at all. Does that give you any sense in terms of where the ground may be shifting?
Well, I don't think you just look at the numbers and kind of say, well, they might go up or down. I mean, it's a sizable lead. It's 4 points more than what the premier had when he started his last term as premier. The favorability is still significant to him, where you've got 47% of the people in this province that give him a thumbs up. I mean, you only need 37% to get a majority government, and he's well beyond that. The question really in my mind now is whether or not, because we've gone through this and because there's a fatigue, whether some of the other issues start to come to the fore. The second thing, though, is you have to look at the performance of the other two parties in terms of how they're, and let's take Mike Schreiner and put him in a separate category. He just doesn't have the war machine the other two have. I'd have to say that, again, the NDP seems to have had a better start than the Liberals have. And, when you take a look at the launch of the bus, you take a look at the launch of the campaign stops, the focus in Toronto on safety doors for subways. I mean, Liberal can make all kinds of excuses for it, but it hasn't been a solid launch. And whether they get their feet underneath them in the coming week is really going to tell the tale of how they do in the back half of the campaign. But I think right now I don't think you're going to see much movement for the time being in terms of the polls.
Neil, what is your team strategy when you look at this? I mean, you talked about it off the top in terms of sort of, take it as an opportunity, but clearly you've been thinking about this for a month or 2 or 3 or 8, because we knew this was coming.
We knew it was coming, and I think we're hamstringed a little bit in terms of third-party advertising. I would have loved to have seen charities exempted from some of the rules. We were often asked, how can we get rid of some of the bureaucracy that's out there? Well, one of the things that has been imposed upon us has been reporting requirements that are pretty substantive, that make it very difficult for an organization like the Daily Bread Food Bank to be able to put forward policy alternatives, at least through paid media. So we've got to go after it from a earned media perspective, and that's really hard right now. It's really hard because there's so much noise. There are so many other issues to talk about. So behind the scenes, we will continue to meet with each of the parties and try to influence their platforms. But when you have two parties who are simply focusing on a very popular premier, there is very little room to be able to navigate what are those sort of consequential policies when it comes to disability or building affordable housing that we want to see debated and talked about with all of the parties.
Yeah, Amanda, when we look at what the Liberals and the NDP are doing, I mean, I understand why they're focusing their guns on Doug Ford, but to Neil's point, it sort of takes the oxygen or the wind out of the sails of any other conversation beyond why Doug's a bad guy.
Sure, but their job isn't to have a conversation about any of those other issues. Their job is to win elections. That's all they're focused on, right? So however they get to that end is the most important thing. And right now, to John's point, I mean, the premier is he's clocking around 50 points. that's like Kim Jong-un territory right now in Ontario. Like it's not.
Oh, I'm sure he'll love that comparison.
No, it is wild, right? The dear leader has come to inspect the assembly line, and we all vote like. So, the only thing that the Liberals and the NDPs should be doing right now is trying to shave points off of him, is trying to make him look, bad, trying to point out the faults, trying to push into those soft spots. So he's had a very Teflon-esque political career thus far. I think, it continues, given we've had the hot mic scenarios, which I'm sure we may or may not get into today. But I think that, their job is not to talk about like real issues. Their job is to win election campaigns. And
we'll get into the hot mic thing in a second. But you pointed out, Monique, the media in central and northern Ontario is focusing on the conversation around these things. The local media. This is where I think this is probably the first major election where we have had this deterioration of local media. So there's a real challenge there to be able to talk about this. And if it's great if we go to town halls and everything else, but the fact of the matter is, most times, if at all, the Tories just don't show up to these things. So it becomes almost a bathwater drinking session.
Absolutely. And I mean, even the local media is struggling to make, these issues come alive. I took a look at the numbers on autism. The autism waiting lists in 2018 when Ford won were 28,000, I think. I might not be exact on the numbers, but it was about 28,000. And he said he was going to eradicate the wait list for treatment for autism. In September of 2024, they were 76,000. So, really simple issues, like it's not a simple issue, but simple facts like that should be, front page. What are you doing? What are you doing for the people of Ontario? How has the world shifted in such a way that these poor families are suffering, that many more, 3 times as many poor families are suffering, not getting the treatment they need for their kids? Those are the kinds of issues that I think we should be talking about, that the media should be talking about. But again, as Amanda pointed out, I mean, it's about winning the election so that we can try and put some policies in place to fix these problems. And part of winning the election is marking up Doug Ford. And I mean, I thought the hot mic issue was an interesting one. I know you're going to get there, but it did show his true colors. He is a Trump supporter, and it looks a little silly on him to be then the champion fighting Trump when he was so clearly cheering him on only a few short weeks ago.
Okay, so yesterday in Ottawa, it was interesting to see the response to that, and we all know we had the hot mic issue, and this would have been 2 or 3 days ago now, and had a lav mic on and makes a comment and drops an F-bomb and, that he was getting stabbed by the president. So yesterday in Ottawa, when he was making his LRT announcement, he was asked, not surprisingly, about the hot mic.
Yeah, on the hot mic. Yeah, he makes me swear once in a while. I think he makes a lot of people swear in this country. So I thought it'd be a little different, a little change, but obviously he decided to pull the knife out and stab us. And when I'm there, my number one job is to protect Ontario, to protect Canadians. That's exactly what I'm going to do. I will fight with every single tool I have in our toolbox to make sure we defend the people of Ontario and in return, defend the people of Canada.
Neil, it's the art of deflection, but also good political rhetoric. I mean, to be able to turn that into I'm the champion for the people, and I'm going to take the knife on your behalf.
I mean, it was really well done. I don't know who gave him that talking point prior to it, but man, it was very well done as a response. And I think it's also what Ford has been very good at. I did this and it didn't turn out, and so I bobbed and weaved and moved over to some other issue. And Ontarians forgive, and they're like, okay, let's move on to the next one.
Yeah, it's a proven track record, John. I mean, how many times has the premier stood up and said, I know, we said we were going to do this, but we did fill in the blank, changed our minds, and we're back to plan B, and we made a mistake, we recognize it, and there's forgiveness.
Well, yeah, my own kids wouldn't know Monty Python, right? Like Gen Zs just don't know. But there's that great scene where the foot comes down and just squashes, right? We've all seen that, right? Yeah. I mean, you've got a huge campaign where the premier has, sucks up all the air in the room. I mean, the issue for the opposition leaders is simply this. we've just gone through almost a week of existential crisis. Consumers are now going in. I was at the Metro shopping store yesterday, and people are actually going through, holding up their iPhones, and they're looking at Canadian products. I mean, it did bring me back flashbacks to, honestly, to COVID, the earliest days of COVID, where I thought I'd put all of that stuff behind and locked it in a drawer, but the same feelings of anxiety over the last week came out. So, I mean, it's not that the issues that we're talking about, healthcare and homelessness and food banks, it's not that they aren't important. The issue really is, it's not the most dominant thing that people are thinking about. They're concerned about their jobs. They're concerned about their country. Where I think the Conservatives have to go with this is actually pivot a bit. Part of it is to address some of those issues if they need to do it. But the other part is, we're now having a discussion in this country about breaking down the barriers within. Francois Legault has just said within the last couple of hours, it would be great to work with oil companies, but there's no way there's a pipeline going through here. Well, okay, so if that's not going to happen, what are the other things that we could be working on in order to make sure that within the next 28 days, we're prepared for the next phalanx? It may be that this president is so distracted by the Middle East and Gaza and Iran and a whole bunch of other things that he kind of goes, okay, I'm done with that. Thank you very much. You're okay, Canada. See you later. I don't think that's going to be the case. But the real question now for the Ford government is, if we want to keep on this theme, the reason why you had this election campaign was to get that mandate, and it's about this issue, then you're going to have to pivot internally and find some other things in policy and start to bring them to the fore, because that will suck up the air of the room of what the opposition parties want to talk about. So I don't know. I think on my mindset right now, I'm still kind of concerned about the future under Trump, as opposed to just getting a family doctor.
Well, to some degree, the Liberals addressed that because they responded to the Premier's comments about Trump with their own attack ad.
This is how Ford really feels about Trump.
Are you still a supporter of Donald Trump?
Absolutely. I wouldn't waver.
After tariffs were announced, Ford said,
The election results, I'm happy to spend 100% of it.
He's in bed with Elon Musk and gave Service Ontario to Staples and Walmart. He's been selling out Ontario to his friends his entire time. Do you really think he's changed? The stakes are too high. Vote Ontario Liberal.
Amanda?
I mean, it's good. I said this morning on John Moore's show. It's good to see the Liberals get off the mat. Like, they're alive, people. They've actually got an attack ad out there that's got some sting. I think they've taken the opportunity with the hot mic issue. I think they're also trying to weave in a narrative around he helps his friends, the Greenbelt stuff. Again, do I think that is enough to really make this stick? No, I don't think it is. And I think the Premier thus far has been successful. To John's point, I think people are more worried about an existential threat right now than Doug Ford candidly letting Staples operate Service Ontario. Like, who cares? They're already in Canadian Tires. I don't even know why that is a news story. But the other thing too is that they're going to continue to push we're the only people that can defend you against the existential threat. Like, the Premier's planning to go to Washington next week, right, with the delegation. That's going to suck up like 2-3 days at minimum. I mean, where's Bonnie Crombie's going to be wandering around Brampton trying to make sure people still like her? Like, I think there's a real challenge that the opposition parties face, and I wouldn't want to be them. It's going to be tough. So good ad. I think it reaches a bit, but I don't think it's enough right now, because we've got this tsunami down south, and the Premier's and his campaign team are rightly pivoted right to it. And Bonnie and Merritt, who we haven't even talked about, by the way, the official opposition exists. Like, it's crazy.
Well, Monique, does the ad overreach, or does it not reach far enough?
No, I think the ad, I think it's a great effort, and I think it highlights, one point in time. As John said, I mean, Ford is Teflon, and he will continue to swat things away, like RCMP investigations into the Greenbelt and other things like that. But I think it's important to remember that, like, there's no way that Ford is negotiating with Trump. I mean, the whole premise of this election is a hoax. It is Ford looking for a longer, another 4 years to take care of his friends. That's why he's called this election. The only person that Trump is going to talk to, the only Canadian, is Trudeau. And I think it's just ludicrous that, yes, we have to stand up for the province. Yes, we have to act as part of Team Canada. But to think that he's leading the charge is delusional. And next week, yes, they're going to be in Washington, but next week we're going to be on to Trump's attack on Europe. We're going to be talking about Gaza. We're going to be talking about who knows what. I mean, maybe he'll be on to his Iran plan by next week. There will be no room in the sphere next week for Canadian premiers to have a presence on U.S. media. I was on the show on Monday, and I said, what happens if they get the 30-day reprieve? And what happened, Dave? An hour later, we got the 30-day reprieve. Like, things change fast, and I don't think that there's going to be as much attention paid to the premiers in Washington next week as people think, because that ship will have sailed by next week. They're not going to loop back to what's happening in Canada until like day 28 of the 30-day reprieve.
Neil, the issue, though, and you made the point, I think you kind of hit when you can. You strike when the opportunity presents itself. And so to that end, I think the Liberal ad worked. The problem that I would see is that they're still talking about Trump in that respect. But back to our conversation or note earlier about the media, it's worth noting that in the full context of that news conference yesterday that I watched, there were at least a half a dozen, if not 8, questions from the media about the hot mic. They only get 2 questions, and they pissed them away on the hot mic issue. So media has become the distraction in that for the most part.
John talked about, how Ford will suck the oxygen out of a room. That oxygen is also being given to him, I would say, in large part by the Liberals. They have constantly made this about a very popular premier. And so I'm not sure whether or not they are, in terms of limited resources, I thought it was an effective ad, but is that all you got kind of thing, which is knocking him versus other campaigns. I mean, Merritt's not getting traction at all, but when it comes to what they are putting out there, they have decent policies, or at least they have clearly labeled and articulated what those policies are when it comes to housing or when it comes to cleaning up encampments and that type of thing. They're articulating positions. That's not getting traction, and it's not getting traction to bring down a popular mayor or a popular premier. And so I'm not sure what the next course of action would be for the parties to start advancing.
Well, I think it's just funny, tit for tat as well, in terms of being distracted. And this almost is into the playbook, though, Amanda, because as soon as we heard that, they were going to launch the attack ad against the hot mic, there's this story about the old quote from Bonnie Crombie, that there was an old clip out there. And to be fair, and it may be out there somewhere, I've been listening for it. I only heard people quote what she said. I haven't actually heard the actual audio. If it's out there, I'd be happy to hear it. But I thought it was interesting that that's where they went on it, against a media stop yesterday in Brampton. And this is
so great to be here in beautiful Brampton at one of our favorite bakeries. Martin Medeiros, our candidate in this area, raves about this bakery each and every day. When I see him, he's always here getting his espresso and his, of course, custard cups.
So she's fighting on the provincial level, but she's got a real fight on her hands at a local level, because Patrick Brown's out actively, campaigning against her for family reasons, it seems. But and it might be a small thing, but it's an irritant that they cannot afford right now.
No, it's good opposition, right? It's good opera research. All campaigns do opera research, so they go through, they pull old quotes and clips and whatever, which is my guess is, I'm assuming this is the PCs, maybe it's the NDP, who knows? And they put it out on it's called Six Buzz, which is a kind of a tabloid style social media that kind of posts news and stuff in the GTA. One that hits, I think, a different demographic. It's a voter, a low information voter, but it is widely watched in Brampton and other places. So I actually think it's a bit more challenging for her campaign, weirdly, than the Trump thing for Ford, who was able to kind of explain it away, where she's just super dismissive of like, oh, I don't go to Brampton. Right. And I think you see her there, plus with the Patrick Brown endorsement, which is a whole other kind of unholy alliance between Patrick Brown and Doug Ford that I don't think any of us would have seen in the tea leaves 5 years ago, but here we sit. And I think it was a really effective way of kind of knocking her off her message, which is in, by the way, a very key region. If they want to win in anywhere, or achieve even official party status, they need seats in Brampton. And saying, I don't like to go to Brampton. And I get it. Like, she was a mayor of Mississauga. She was saying, like, I don't do events there. I just do Mississauga. But the way she said it was dismissive. And I think Bramptonians may have some insecurities there where this certainly feeds into.
But I asked the question yesterday of Bob Richardson, Monique, is that wise politics for the mayor of a major city in the GTA to be, targeting the leader of the provincial party?
I don't think anyone would accuse Patrick Brown of wise politics. His history is not exactly rife with examples of wise politics. The whole kind of 905 world has been a mystery to me over time. I'm a northern girl. I live in Toronto sometimes. I live in Callander, Ontario sometimes. But I don't think it's wise for any mayor to take shots at leaders of the parties. I mean, at some point you're going to have to work with them. And I think that mayors, for the most part, should remain neutral in provincial elections and should be ready to work with whoever's elected.
Yeah, John, when we look at 905, we always talk about how important it has been, it will be. But when some cases, you're looking at the votes, there's the margin there are slimmer than the actual, electoral map might suggest.
Yeah, and tough for Bonnie Crombie with Patrick Brown's mother-in-law running against him, and therefore a team in her backyard. I mean, it may be at the end of the day where she loses her opportunity to have a seat, and the party gets to, right now the modeling based on what we have, given the polling, shows them at 8 seats. Just on that cusp, right? Look, I think there's another part to this, and it reminded me very much of Dalton McGuinty's first campaign against Mike Harris. I remember very, very clearly going into Newstalk 1010's. In fact, Dave, it was called CFRB back then. Going into the
You're old. You're really old.
I know. Well, I started there a long time ago, but going in there one night, and McGuinty's bus was coming in on the Gardner Expressway, and it broke down. It broke down just outside of Toronto, and we were talking about it, saying the wheels had come off the bus, like literally, figuratively. The campaign, Monique, you probably remember that. It was better the next time. But there's a whole issue here that you've got with the campaign, with the Liberals, that we just can't deny. The clip she's talking about, I don't know what the slogan is for the Liberals, although, we've heard it's more for you, which could play into the Conservatives' hands. It just seems disjointed. The campaign itself doesn't have much traction. The clip you just showed was, and I get it, it was just a clip, but it's kind of like when people are concerned about their jobs and what's going to happen with the United States and things like that, we're talking about local cupcakes. There's no there, and I don't know what's going to happen after this campaign. But I think the NDP are actually better positioned. They may be lower in the percentages, but they've got a higher volume of seats right now based on the concentration of where the vote is. So I think that there's a more existential threat right now to the Liberals, even though they're out there with a campaign. I don't know what it stands for. Their bus has mice type along the bottom where their leader is. It's got 11,000 people died. I guess that, but when you open up the side of the bus itself, it blots out Ford's name. It's almost like they've just got an amateur group running the campaign. So I know I could be a little lighter touched with the Liberals, but campaigns matter. And to Amanda's point, it's about winning election campaigns. And right now, Doug Ford's got a team there that every time you put your head up above the foxhole, they're going to shoot back, like maybe 2 or 3-fold. So it's just taken the every day that you get this issue where they take a shot at Ford, they're going to retaliate. We haven't even seen what their opposition war room really has on her.
Yeah, but John, I gotta take issue. Your blue roots are like more than showing at this point.
Roots?
Blue roots, John. We all know you've got them. Come on, don't deny them.
Don't think. Well, look, to put that to rest for a moment, after being a parliamentary intern and going to work for Hugh Segal for 6.5 years is not exactly blue roots, I would tell you. And then working for Angus Reid, who was a Liberal in and of itself. So let's not get personal with this. The reality is, I've done 20 election campaigns and seen a whole lot of campaigns in my time, and the Liberals have not their campaign to date hasn't exactly been something to shine about, honestly.
No, and I you know what, John, I agree. But I think we have to actually look at why that is. I mean, they don't have party status. They don't have an office at Queen's Park. They don't have the resources. What I find interesting in this campaign is that Merritt Stiles, who I quite like and I think has a lot to say, has not really gotten any traction, even though she's had the whole machinery of being the leader of the official opposition for what, 2.5 years. She's had, or I guess no longer than that. She's got an office, she's got resources, she's got staff, and yet we don't see her shining. We've spent most of the last 29 minutes, 30 minutes talking about Ford and Bonnie Crombie and not talking about the official opposition and how they're doing in this campaign. So I find that interesting. I get what you're saying about the Liberal campaign. I think that there are a lot of reasons why it's struggling at this point. And, you know, they've got a federal leadership campaign happening now. So they've got lots of staffers, including people you know well, working on those campaigns. And, you know, in this unnecessary provincial campaign that we're in, it's a struggle to get attention, and it's a struggle to pull it all together. No doubt about it.
Well, it may or may not be unnecessary. Neil, I think we're into it. So whether, you know, I understand the sentiment behind it. You've already got the mandate. Why do you need another mandate? I get that. But this is where we are. So what are you, you know, best case scenario? What are you hoping to see happen in the next 30 days?
I mean, I would love a pivot to talk about the actual issues that Ontarians are facing. You know, 1 million Ontarians depend on food banks. I mean, that should evoke some sort of significant policy conversation at every single press conference, not whether or not our premier would have voted for Trump if he was American. And so I would love for the pivot to those types of conversations. It has been incredibly I don't know, frustrating to me that it has been a campaign about personality rather than a campaign about substance.
Well, I mean, to be fair, it's ever been thus when we start talking about, you know, these things.
Yeah, but let's challenge that for a moment. It's you know, and I'd look at anybody who's in the opposition. First of all, it's been smart politics the way this was played. I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, they knew that this was coming. They lined up the batter, they lined up the plate, they threw the ball, and bang, there's tariffs for you and protect Canada. Secondly, the only issue that people have been talking about so far is exactly what's been put over the border by the President of the United States. I mean, he's threatened us. You know, it's not that we're going to hockey games and booing, you know, Doug Ford because he doesn't have a doctor in every house. People are going out there and booing because they've got a real sentiment and concern about what's going on. So unnecessary or not, the reality is that is what's on the plate. So I don't know how you burst through that. I mean, I defer to people like, you know, Monique, who's run campaigns, and Amanda, who communicate in campaigns, but that's what people are talking about. Mark Carney this morning is standing up in front of his campaign team talking about nothing but this. How do you turn the dial and turn up the volume on some of the other issues during this campaign? That's a pretty monumental task. That's not my skill set for sure. All I know is that that's what you're dealing with.
Amanda, how does a campaign, and we were talking a little bit about this yesterday, take advantage of this groundswell of sentiment that is so patriotic or unusually patriotic for we Canadians now who, you know, see this as a threat, and all of a sudden, yes, we're booing at the Senators game and at the Raptors game. And I heard, you know, people online saying, well, you know, so you can't boo the guy, boo it because it's Trump. There are 70 million Americans who voted for Trump, and I think that's who the boos are directed at. We're standing up on our hind legs. Where's the opportunity there to kind of cut through and say this is all about us as opposed to about Trump?
I think you've seen Premier Ford already do a little bit of that, right? With the hat, like Canada's not for sale. Like, to me, that was a really smart kind of removing there. I think you'll see it again when he goes next week to Washington to kind of wave the flag. And I get the point Monique made a little earlier about American networks aren't going to care. He doesn't need the American networks to care. He needs the Canadian news outlets to care, right? And Canadians and Ontarians to care, which is what will happen. He can meet with like the second place senator from whatever, and it's still going to be a news event here, and it's going to be a show, and there's going to be, you know, big big black cars driving around Washington, going to important meetings, a big delegation of all business leaders and all that kind of stuff, right? So I think there's that. And I think because he's the leader of the province, he's uniquely positioned to do that, unlike the other opposition leaders who will try. But I think the problem is the environment, and to your point, is more of like a rah cheer Canada, and nobody wants. There's not a lot of appetite to sit here and throw pot shots at each other about why this sucks or why that isn't good anymore. People see an existential threat, and their natural instinct is to pivot and fight that as opposed to fight each other internally. And I do think there is movement, there's definitely room, and I'm sure John's seen this in polling around like the doctor issue, the medical issue. I think that is like a place where the Liberals could make it stickier, or the NDP if they were successful at it. But they need some space to breathe. I mean, last night, I was just making dinner and my phone started to explode because the president of the United States decided to annex Gaza. What is this morning? Like last night, they canceled all packages from USPS, and like this morning, now all the 10 hours later, it's done. Like it's wild. So I just think cutting through in this environment is incredibly difficult. I also don't think an opposition leader candidate, frankly, wrapping themselves in the Ontario or Canadian flag is going to get them any more votes. Like it's really not. Like they need a really good piece of oppo to kind of dump in here to knock Ford off of his game, or they need to kind of pick a lane and really start to hit and over and over and over again. And every day on the campaign, it's that issue. Until maybe there's some conversation around it. But I would also just one more thing on Neil's point about affordability. I actually do think that's a major issue people have been talking about. Pierre Poilievre, for example, federally have been talking about it for ages. The Liberals federally have been way behind that ball. I think there's a lot of conversation about it there. But right now, as John's talking about, where we're at is there's so much oxygen being sucked up by the U.S. It's so new, it's so fast, it's so fresh. It's just people have turned away from that for the moment. But I do think there's a lot of conversation happening in this country around affordability.
Well, on that then, Neil, I mean, isn't that the way to sort of wedge the tariff conversation? This is going to be about affordability. I mean, and this is how we're going to manage it. And I don't hear that angle or that point being made. It's about an unnecessary election when we should be talking about affordability. Doesn't the tariff actually give you the opportunity to talk expressly about affordability?
It should, but I think the premier has done a masterful job of being able to come across that he is the one best positioned to be able to deal with this. I think the public believe that to be the case. To Monique's point, whether or not he actually is having those conversations with Trump, he's not. But he's certainly perceived as the one that would be best positioned to do that. And then that translates into a more stable Ontario. That translates into the job losses that will be prevented from happening. And so he's got that perception, and it's going to be very difficult for either of the other parties to be able to knock him off it.
Well, we've talked about where, Crombie has been in the efforts based on their attack ad. And I think it's interesting. Yesterday when we were on, Anna Bailau is in Merritt Stiles' riding. And she said, I like her, etc. But her view was that there were too many things being dangled out there as opposed to focusing on one or two really specific things. So it happens as we speak. A couple of hours ago, Merritt Stiles, the leader of the NDP, was in Parkdale and, talking about a Parkdale issue.
Well, folks, I am here today to talk about one of Doug Ford's greatest failures and what I'm going to do about it. You heard it already. I am here today at in Parkdale, where people experiencing homelessness, poverty, and food insecurity can get some support, be part of a community, and get some support to rebuild their lives.
And that's the message, isn't it, Neil? I mean, that's where you want to take it. Here's the challenge. That's going to get buried in terms of the introduction to her comments. But later today, she's supposed to sit down with Steve Paikin. So here's hoping that, he'll press her on that.
Well, I think she's right to be there. Park is a fantastic organization that's doing a lot of great things, but is that getting traction across the province? Hammering home the affordability crisis, I think would be wise of the other two parties. I'm really unclear on how they're going to be able to get it out with the noise that we see across the province or across the news cycle, particularly when the press is asking the 8 questions about a hot mic or about Trump rather than about the issues that we're all facing.
So, John, let me suggest, and it's already kind of come up here in terms of the chaos, the circus that is Washington right now, and Amanda pointing out all the swirl. I mean, there isn't just one thing. We're watching a president deconstruct a country in front of our eyes without putting too fine a point on it. And the post office is one, U.S. aid is another part of it. The tariffs are another part of it. And then the whole question around what will he do about creating the Riviera in the Gaza? And that one, I think, might be one of those things that changes the conversation on the campaign, because we have seen the way we've seen responses and protests here in Ontario and certainly in Toronto around the Middle East, etc. It means that all the candidates are going to get asked about that part of the Trump agenda. They're going to have to be ready to answer those questions, aren't they?
Oh, I don't know. My sense is that there comes a point. Look, I was talking to my wife the other night. We were scrolling through and following this stuff, and I finally said to her, it's not our country. It's their country. At some point in the United States, there's going to be a group of people who push back, and it's starting. There are some protests. There is a bill being introduced today to impeach the president, and you say, well, that might not go anywhere. He's still got a thin majority, but the reality is that, Steve Bannon has talked about muzzle velocity of issues, like flood the zone with all of these things, and to mistake for a moment that Mr. Trump actually has all of these powers would be a problem, because he doesn't. At some point, the question is whether or not he can get further down the field, but then is cut back by judges who are freezing things, all that sort of stuff. But I'm talking about their country. I mean, in a provincial election campaign, Doug Ford simply has to say, and I would encourage the other two parties to simply say, look, that's the United States. We have enough on our plate here to be worried about. We have to make sure that we have our jobs safe, our own needs looked after. If the president of the United States is going to talk about all of these things every single day, we can't be on his agenda. We got to be on our own and just pivot back to where we are. I think that what's interesting for both of these two opposition candidates is that they've decided to go local. I mean, if you can't fight on the open ground, I mean, High Park, Swansea has been NDP. It's got those NDP roots. I mean, if you're going to be in the 905, you might as well go to areas that have had Liberal success. You might as well be in the north trying to say, look, don't hand the keys to the car to this guy. At least have us have a fighting chance to take your issue to the front lines. So it may be that over the next couple of weeks, they stop talking as much about what's happening south of the border, because there will be, this fatigue. And it may be more about, let me be your local representative. Like, remember, there are different campaign signs that go up. Sometimes it's team this, sometimes it's just a local candidate. I get a sense that probably Merritt Stiles is more into, let's go to the ridings that are NDP held. Let's go to those where we have a chance of securing and holding on to them. And let's make the point that we're here for you, as opposed to just fighting the big issues. And I think that may have some salience in some ridings where people, including the Liberals, want to pull some local votes and say, at least you have a voice in all of what's going on. That stuff's crazy out there. This stuff matters.
Yeah, but Monique, I think that out of everything that's going on in Washington, the Middle East is the one that's explosive in terms of you being required to have a point of view on it politically. I know CEOs of nonprofits and public sector organizations. The people have demanded they have a position on the Middle East. It's not their lane. So I think it's going to come up. Premier Ford, what do you think of the president's solution in Gaza? Bob, what do you think? And they're going to answer that. I think there's some kryptonite there if they're not careful.
I think the leaders are going to get the question for sure. And I think in urban centers, we're going to hear more about it. In North Bay, are we going to get that question? No, I don't think so. I kind of want to riff back to what John was saying, just to talk about, the opposition leaders trying to revert back to what's going on here at home. I agree with John. I think being able to say, look, the Americans are doing what they're doing. That's who they elected. We don't agree with it. We think they're on the wrong track. But what are we seeing at home? And John, I would want to ask you about your polling on right track, wrong track, because my understanding is the wrong track numbers are fairly high for Ford. And I think that that might be an area where the opposition leaders, both opposition leaders and Mike Schreiner, all have a role to play, to be emphasizing, you know, the province is on the wrong track. How do we get it back on track? And John, correct me if I'm wrong on those numbers, but my understanding was that on wrong track, the Ford government is scoring high.
Well, it's you're right, Monique. It's just over half. So the issue you always have to look at here, as you know, is that if you need 37% for a majority government in the province of Ontario, if 47% say you're on the right track, you're in pretty good shape. I mean, that's the thing. So there is a sense among those who don't like Mr. Ford. I mean, his popularity is still, when you look at this, at about, I find this fascinating. You know, he's at 47% in terms of positive image. Okay, so he's in a minus category. But the other thing is that 30% of the people, as of last week, have no idea who either the Liberal or the NDP candidate are. So you can argue that it's on the wrong track and get a slim majority view of that. But you need a lot more than that. I mean, it's way different if you're talking federally, where, you know, if Justin Trudeau could wake up every morning and find that 2/3 of the public actually hated his guts, he'd still be able to win, except that he got up one morning and found that 83% felt that way. That you can't handle that. So still, I mean, again, it coalesces around trying to get the two opposition parties to take that 53% of the vote that's not going his way in terms of right track. And it's also in terms of getting the 66% of the vote and consolidating it somehow that's not going to him and cutting through. And I don't see it yet in the numbers, at least, but that's the challenge. There's actually a 2/3 of the public in this province that don't want to see Doug Ford elected. And we don't feel that mass, and we don't feel that momentum.
Yeah, it's funny. But early on in this, in our daily journey, Amanda, we had Gerard Kennedy on, and his feeling, the pulse was to John's point. The numbers don't reflect it, but that there is some groundswell of unease or dis-ease, and I don't know whether or not, you know, you can measure that in any calculable way. But the idea that if the opposition is going to make any ground, they're going to have to ignite that.
I mean, yeah, I think that's, you know, the obvious point, right? Is that in order to beat him, they're going to have to get more people to not want to vote for him. And right now, there has been, I think, very unsuccessful in making that case broadly. And I think the other thing to point out is, yes, the Premier's focus more broadly on existential threats. He's doing that purposefully to sort of suck the oxygen out of this election campaign and away from the other two ones. But John points out, if you went on the street with a photo of Bonnie Crombie and Merritt Stiles, most people wouldn't know who they were, which is a huge problem for their campaigns, right? And that's actually where advertising dollars and the pre-writ stuff, that should have been done before, but fair enough, especially with Liberals. I know they don't have any money. But the other thing that Conservatives have been doing, quietly, but I think smartly, is kind of continuing to scoop, they're getting all these little labor endorsements, right? Every day there's another local that's endorsing, which is unusual for PCs. We've seen the Ford Coalition kind of coalesce around that. And that happened also municipally with his brother when he was mayor as well. And even a little bit when he ran for mayor unsuccessfully against John Tory. But I think that just speaks to, they're not putting all their eggs in the US basket. They're continuing that effort to sort of diversify the vote, to make him kind of the common, more of a common man. I'm out for you, little guy. I'm here to help. We're aligned with the trades and blue collar workers. So they haven't left those tracks if they need to pivot that way. While also still, I think, broadly focused on the smart play, which is just to suck the oxygen out of the room, make sure nobody knows who any of these other opposition leaders are. And people say, I'd rather go with the devil I know than the devil I don't.
Can I just add one thing to that? I mean, we said when we talked earlier last week, the potential campaign for the Liberals is actually a very urban-based campaign. I mean, Bonnie Crombie came into Toronto, and instead of talking about $4.1 billion of investment that she might make in transit for all of the urban centers. And I mean, the Premier's kind of uploaded to Metrolinx the Ottawa transit. I mean, there was an opportunity there to talk about investment overall, when in fact it was about safety of 300 more people on the subway and these doors that would cost on a line item $4.1 billion. If there was a way in which, somebody in the Liberal campaign could walk into the room and say, okay, we're going to scrap what we were doing. It's not working. We're going to move in, and we're just going to focus on trying to wedge into those seats that we can get in the urban centers and in the north. And we can talk about these issues and forget about the other stuff. then everything would be oriented towards that. But it's not the case at the moment. And so I think that there has to be a real reorientation in the back 3.5 weeks of this campaign to try and move into those areas where there's some soft flesh for the Liberals. And if it's out taking on Ford on his issues, I don't think they're going to win. But if they're into the urban settings and into these places that really matter on the issues that matter for healthcare and what Neil's talking about, then their real competition is just the NDP, not necessarily the Conservatives.
Neil, how much of your team's effort right now is to have the Daily Bread Food Bank, your central location, a campaign stop for the leaders?
So we are hosting, a local debate. I'm disappointed that the winning strategy continues to be that if you're in the lead, you don't show up to local debates. I find that very frustrating for democracy, but I understand that it works well. And so we will have the Liberals, the NDP, the Green, and the none of the above party arriving here at the Daily Bread Food Bank to have a debate next week. We do want to make sure that the leaders know that we will work with every party. We are a charity. We have to be a nonpartisan, and we continue to do that. At the same time, we are going to press upon them. Here are the facts. Here's what's going on in your ridings when it comes to poverty with food bank usage, and here are the policy alternatives. But it's. When we talk about the on track, off track numbers, and 30% of Ontario not knowing who the NDP or Liberal leaders are, then there is just such advantage for the PCs right now, and they are also, Joe Biden would always say, "Don't compare me to the Almighty, compare me to the alternative," and I'm not sure Ontarians are willing to make that leap from. I disagree. I'm not happy with the track that we're on, but the alternative is better than where we're going, and I don't think that they're making that leap. But I could be wrong in terms of the data. I'd love John to sort of weigh in on that.
John, thought?
No, I really think that it's going to be very difficult for the opposition in 3.5 weeks to have some kind of traction to orient the campaign. I mean, the problem that they've got, of course, is that even the Prime Minister now is calling for a USMC summit on Friday. I mean, this issue is just going to continue to roll along. I think the consolidation of going to ground, I would even, to the Liberals, I would even change the slogan. I mean, nobody knows it. More for you is we should be better about, building communities or building better or something like that. Something at least gives you something to grab onto. But I think my concentration would be to try and get into those issues that are more urban based and try to drive them through there, because trying to fight on the bigger issues is just not going to be there.
Amanda, before we go, I've asked others in the last week or so, just as this has evolved on a daily basis, and the idea that, we want, if this is going to be a change election, and that's what the opposition is hoping for, it really needs to change the ballot question. And that so far has been the struggle for the opposition. But given this shift away from the intense focus on tariffs, not the entire focus, does the debate in your eyes play into an opportunity more now for the opposition than it might have a week ago?
I think with the pausing of tariffs, they have more of an opportunity. I mean, I think that opportunity goes from like 1% to 3% as far as them being able to drive something different. I don't see, and that's just not even, let's just say it's 1% to 3%. You don't see the political heft on those sides to really push in and actually change the conversation in any real way. I mean, we're early on in the writ for what it's worth. I know we say 3 weeks, but like 2 weeks is a long time in politics. So maybe they have some great big beautiful piece of oppo that they're going to drop in week 2 that's going to knock the premier off his game. Maybe they've got a whole campaign plan we don't know about. But I don't think this is not a change election. This is an election about, are we okay with this guy still being in charge as we go through this rocky time? Do we feel safe? And I think Ontarians broadly look at the premier and they're going to say, yes, we feel okay with this guy being in the helm while we go through these troubled times. Like, they don't want to shift stuff. And I don't think that is going to change.
So the debate negligible in terms of its effect, you think?
like a debate, like an actual debate
Leaders
between the
debate.
leaders.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, like I love them. Like I love watching them. I love prepping for them. They're so much fun. But no. People like any mainstream media stuff right now doesn't really move the needle very much. Like you need clips. And I say this as someone who hosts a mainstream show every week on the Bell Network. You need clips, but they're way better off with the like a robust presence on social, like, you know, YouTube, digital ads, like all that kind of stuff. That's where all the money, that's where the things move. And yeah, so no, debates are fun for us. Well, I would love to dissect it, but I doubt it.
And honestly, what the Liberals, I hate to keep cascading down their avenue, but they're the ones that need the help. Right now, the seat model shows them at 8 seats. Honestly, if I were sitting at the table, I'd say, guys, we need 15. Like we might only get 10, but we got to get official party status. I mean, there's some ground game to be made here, and we've got some short-term things for the Liberal Party. We're not going to win the election, but we got to get on the board. So I'd be identifying maybe the 20 seats that you might have some maneuverability in, and I'd be going at them strong, and hopefully you'd get 10.
Monique, just draw on your experience
where you want to end up.
Monique, drawing on your experience, then I don't necessarily, expect you to draw the curtain back entirely. But at what point is there a panic button that says we really got to get our shit together here? Otherwise, we can't survive another outcome of 8 seats.
Well, I mean, the panic button, I think, is being pressed daily. Yeah, like I think the length of this campaign, which is so short, and the ability to cut through that we've all talked about for the last hour is so limited. I think that they just have to do the full court press. And I agree with John. I mean, party status means a world of difference to a political party. And I think the Ford, the Tories, the Ford team are showing in spades what incumbency can do. And so we need to counter that. And I think they've just got to, they need a full court press for sure.
All right. Well, let's leave it there. And this has been a spirited conversation. Thanks to Monique Smith, John Wright, and Neil Hetherington. Good to talk to you. And Amanda Galbraith. And we'll be back at it again tomorrow. Just a note, we may have something more to talk about. I'll be curious to see how how it plays out with Merritt Stiles and Steve Paikin. Of course, it'll always be a good conversation there, and we'll bring you up to speed on how that played out. But, of course, we're back at it again tomorrow. It is On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast, the daily edition. And if you've got something to say about what we had to say, you can go to my website, davetrafford.com, and there's a talk back button there. You can leave us a message, and we'd be happy to include you and your thoughts in the programming. In the meantime, thanks for being here. I'm Dave Trafford for Story Studio Network.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.